And this is online, so you can look at this. Because I thought to myself years ago, what, you don't need a license for a cap and ball revolver, so you could actually have a cap and ball revolver in your house if it was old enough, and you don't need a license for it. Is that what you're saying? And apparently the guy in the shop said, yeah, I can sell you this antique cap and ball revolver, no problem at all. You don't need a license for it. I thought, wow. Greetings, YouTubers. Well, today I'm talking about the UK, UK gun laws. And as I know, a lot of you have been asking me questions about the UK gun laws, and I'm not really up to date. So I have been reading up on it. And when it comes to antique fire, because there's a show I used to watch quite a lot of in America, in Las Vegas, called Pawn Stars. You've probably seen it. It's a pawn shop run by the Harrison family. And he says he only buys guns before a certain date because there's no restrictions on antique guns. But after a certain date, you can't deal in them. You've got to be licensed dealer. And it was very similar in the UK because antique firearms, you know, cap and ball, muskets and things, you didn't need a license for any of that stuff. And I've got it here, the background, because they've changed the law now, because it wasn't really clearly defined. The antique firearm section wasn't clearly defined under section 58 bracket 2 of the Firearms Act 1968. Now I think part of the problem here, back in the day, an antique was something that was 100 years old, and as we know, 100 years ago, was the First World War was over 100 years ago, so that would make every single weapon, including Vickers heavy 303 machine gun, an antique, and it wouldn't need a firearms license. No. Okay, so obviously they had to update the law. I mean, that's normal, isn't it? Yeah, if Russia invades Ukraine, all of a sudden we can give them loads of bombs and guns and mines and missiles, tanks, armoured cars. You can bring them to England, train them all up, send them back. By the way, it's going to help the Ukrainians to evict the evil Russians from their country. Well, in some cases that will be the case, but in other cases criminals will be creaming off firearms like assault rifles and ammunition and selling it into the black market, I'm sure. So who's supplying who with firearms? You know, is there any vetting procedures? You know, are the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers that you're giving these weapons to, are they being vetted by the civilian police in the British Isles to see if they're suitable? Or will they go off murdering people with them? Because they'll probably go off killing Russians with them for sure, but they'll probably go off murdering people with them as well. And as I said, creaming off supplies and selling it into the black market, where it will leave the Ukraine and go back into the EU. And weapons may turn up in criminal gangs and things. So, date of manufacture, it says date of manufacture 11. To be regarded as an antique, a firearm must have been manufactured before the date specified in Regulation 4 of the Antique Regulations, which is the 1st of September 1939. You take it, so Lugers are antiques then, aren't they? I don't think so. Right, now what I was talking about, I was talking the other day about air guns. Air guns and the 12 foot-pound rule and everything over that. You have to have a firearms license and things. And once upon a time in the UK, there was a thing called antique firearms. Now, antique firearms and firearms that are obsolete, you can't get ammunition for them anymore because they're that old, nobody makes it anymore. These used to be unlicensed. You didn't need to have a license, because if you got something from the Boer War, you know, Martini Henry from the Zulu Dawn or something like that, you know, old stuff that you can't get ammunition for, basically, anymore. Or cap and ball revolvers, where you pour the black powder down the hole and a lead ball and stuff like that. Genuine antiques. You didn't need a license in the UK. Okay, well, it goes on to talk about definitions of antique firearms, and it talks about propulsion systems. Any propulsion system which involves the use of loose charge or separate ball or other missile loaded at the muzzle end of the barrel, chamber or cylinder, which uses independent source of ignition. This covers muzzle loading firearms. So you can still have, I read into that, you can still have a cap and ball revolver or a single shot flintlock. And there was no specific definition of what was an antique firearm. Well, I think that was ridiculous because, an old cap and ball, Colt Navy, Colt Army, as in Josie Wales, the outlaw Josie Wales, they're just as deadly today as they were when they were new. So, not having a license for them, I can't see the logic behind that at all. Especially since a lot of dealers were buying up firearms which were obsolete. You can't get ammunition for them. And they were making ammunition for them and then selling them to drug gangs or criminal gangs and things like this. And the law were jumping up and down going, we're going to add them to the blacklist. You can't do that. And people were getting sent to prison, as you would, for supplying guns to criminals. Obsolete cartridges under Section 58(2)(b) of the 1968 Firearms Act. A firearm can also be regarded as antique if its chamber, or each of its chambers, is either chambered when it was is either the chamber it had when it was manufactured or is a replacement of the chamber that's identical to it in all material respects, and its chamber or chambers are designed for use with a specific type of cartridge, whether it's not also capable of being used other cartridges used with other cartridges. Regulation 2. And for example, I've seen the Webley revolver, the .455. A lot of people shave the cylinder down and put moon clips on with a 45 ACP. That'd definitely be banned, wouldn't it? For example, I don't think the Webley is obsolete anyway. You have to look at the bigger picture and think to yourself, well, why? I mean, obviously you need to have a firearms license if you've got a firearm. That's not unreasonable, is it? But then you've got these exemptions for things that, by the way, are not really firearms anymore. And you've got firearms licenses for air guns that are a bit too powerful. And it's all this strictness, but it's a double standard, isn't it? Because, if someone was manufacturing, let's say you were manufacturing firearms and ammunition, and you were giving them away, selling them to criminals, and loads of crimes were being committed and murders and things, the police would want to come and get you. But you can give loads and loads of weapons and ammunition to the Ukraine, by the way, to go and fight the war, and all the criminals can take them away and cream them off and murder people with them. So what does that make the government that's giving them all the weapons? So really it's down to the bullets that they fire, because cartridges omitted from the obsolete cartridge list are as follows: .320 British, also known as 320 revolver CF, short or long; .41 Colt, short or long; .44 Smith & Wesson Russian; .442 revolver, also known as the 44 Webley. These are omitted, from the obsolete cartridge list. 9.4 Dutch revolver, 10.6mm German ordnance revolver, 11mm French ordnance, 11mm revolver. What's that? That's got to be 43. On advance from law enforcement that the above cartridge features in crime, the government decided not to include them in the list of obsolete cartridges in the schedule to the antique regulations. This means that from March the 22nd, 2021, all firearms chambered for use with the above cartridges will cease to be regarded as exempt. Ha! So there. Because you can use them in crime. So you can't use a cap and ball revolver in crime. Okay, you go and gun someone down in a pub. That's not a crime, no? Now, I'm not going to get embroiled in the Ukraine war, because it's just another fight with Russia, isn't it? It's just having another go. I mean, what happened in Vietnam? Russians were supporting the North, and the Americans were supporting the South. Korean War before that, same thing. You know, Afghanistan, Russians invaded Afghanistan. Everyone was helping the Mujahideen. Even James Bond was helping the Mujahideen. So the Russians pulled out, and then they went in. The Americans went in. The British went in, and all of a sudden, the Mujahideen's the enemy. Look at Saddam Hussein. Oh, Saddam. Yeah, Iran-Iraq war. Giving Saddam loads of support, money, weapons, bombs, you name it. Backing him up to the hilt. And then once the war was over, oh, we don't like Saddam anymore. Let's invade Iraq. I suppose you don't stand much of a chance against the firearms unit with Glocks and Heckler and Kochs and things, I suppose. That's where they're coming from. Where was I? Yeah, this means that from March 22nd, 2021, all firearms chambered for use with the above cartridges will cease to be regarded as exempt and antiques and will become subject to the controls of the 1968 Firearms Act, including certification that needs to be registered. Now, coming on to cartridges added to the obsolete cartridge list. It's quite a long list. So, all these you don't need a firearms license for, because all these are considered to be obsolete, okay? .26 BSA, rimless. .33 BSA, .360, .40 BSA, .400, .425 Wesley Richards Magnum, .475, .475 number 2 Jeffrey, 475, .50, .50110, .577. I mean, most people haven't got a clue what these cars. If you're an American and you're into guns, you'll probably know all these. But I've never heard of any of these. 6.5 times 5.3 millimeter, Dutch Romanian. 8 times 5.6 millimeter. 8 times 5.8 millimeter, PR Krag. 8 millimeter Musara. 9 times 5.6 millimeter. So if you've got any of these guns in the UK, they're exempt apparently, because you can't get bullets for them. Unless you're a smart ass who can make your own bullets, of course. And you're probably breaking the law because you're in possession of ammunition. Ah! From the 22nd of March, firearms which are chambered for use with these cartridges, which meet other statutory criteria for an antique firearm, will be exempt from licensing control and can therefore be possessed without a firearms certificate, or, where relevant, a Section 5 authority, and or the need to be registered as a firearm dealer. Well, Section 5 firearms licence is even harder to get than a normal one, a normal Section 1. I don't even know what kind of guns fire are for that. I'd have to Google it. And apparently museums have licences. You know, if you're a museum and you've got antique firearms, you need a licence anyway. And they're talking about that, and it goes into whether you can keep them or not, or whether you have to dispose of them, and then surrender, disposal, acquisition, having them deactivated. That's another one. A bit butchered, so it doesn't fire anymore. I will put a link to this on the video. basically you can't. You can have certain firearms that are really, really old and obsolete, but you can't create any ammunition for them or fire them. And you can't buy and sell them either. That's because there's a list of offences of how hard your bottom will be smacked if you do. Yeah, I knew it. In accordance with Section 126 of the Policing and Crime Act 2017, the calibre pistol or revolver shall not be possessed. So you're not allowed to have ammunition for your antique firearm, okay? Must not possess ammunition suitable for the firearm, and it mustn't fire it. Okay, so it goes on to say the vast majority of firearms affected are expected to be handguns and will be therefore also become prohibited weapons under Section 5 of the 1968 Act, from which they will no longer be exempt as a result of the changes. However, existing owners will be able to apply to possess them on a firearm certificate without needing Section 5 authority. I mean, Section 5, they're prohibited weapons like machine guns, you know. You can't get a licence for them. No one will give you it's the Home Office anyway, it's not the police. So nobody gets a Section 5 unless you're serious firearms dealer and you meet all the requirements and pay them loads of money. You can't, bored in the street, you can't just go, I want a Section 5, can I have a machine gun please? No. As with any firearms licence, the police will need to satisfy that applicants are fit to be entrusted with a firearm, are not a prohibited person, and will not represent a danger to public safety or to the peace. Okay. And then right at the bottom it says offences relating to antique firearms. So it is an offence to carry an antique firearm in a public place without lawful authority or reasonable excuse. Does that include if it's not loaded? What if you're going to sell it to you're taking it to the pawn shop? I don't know. Trespassing with a firearm and any other provision of the 68 Act as far as it applies to offences under sections 19, 20 and 21. So there. So yeah, they're very, very strict. If you've got a handgun now in the UK, you have to have a barrel about this long and a spiky, stocky bit. So it's about this big, the pistol. Because they think that by doing that, you won't be able to hide it under your coat and shoot people. Now, if you were going to go and shoot someone, do you think sawing the stock off and cutting the barrel a bit shorter, you wouldn't do that because you'd be in breach of your firearms regulations? Or do you think, murdering people would exempt you from that? Who thinks these rules up? I honestly don't know. The UK is so full of bullshit when it comes to firearms and laws and everything. But like I said earlier, in an earlier video, you get policemen that go around murdering people, firearms officers. There was one recently, the last few years. Wayne Cousins, he was called, you could Google it, police firearms officer. And he murdered a young woman during the COVID regulations. He just pulled up in his car. Stop! Why are you out with the car? I'm arresting you. Cuffed her up, put her in the back of the car, took her away, raped her, murdered her, and cut her body up into little pieces. And you think, whoa, really bad. Give the police their dues. They nailed him. They didn't make any. Oh no, he's a cop. No, none of that. They nailed his ass and they put him in the dock. And he's doing life now, so he's never going to get out. But if police do something bad with firearms, you don't take the firearms away from the police and say, no policemen can have firearms anymore. We'll give you a big stick instead, shall we? No, they carry on. So it's not. You see, firearms is a business. It's a good thing, but people say, well, there's no level of firearms offences in the UK. Because it's massive in the United States, obviously, because there's a lot more guns available in the United States, but there's very few available to criminals in the UK. It's true. It's very small amounts of people have real firearms, and people try to modify other stuff, and that's not really up to it. If criminals had the same firepower as the police, they'd go have an epi, wouldn't they? Even the police themselves don't carry submachine guns. They do carry them, but they're semi-automatic. They don't have fully automatic submachine guns. And everyone was always restricted to only 500 rounds or something like that. When I had my firearms license, you couldn't have loads of bullets. You couldn't stockpile thousands of rounds in case you went on a mock one day. It didn't come into their brains that if you were going to run a mock and you did want to stockpile them, you could just buy 500 at a time. And if they said, well, where's the other 5? I've shot them all off. These people get paid 150 grand a year to sit there in offices writing out a load of bollocks rules that are proper criminals would easily get round all these rules. I mean, can you imagine having a load of cap and ball revolvers and pistols and single shot, what do they call them, flintlock pistols, stand and deliver? You'd have a couple of them, wouldn't you? The highwaymen back in the day. If you wanted to shoot people, you could just go and buy them without a permit. Oh, they're not allowed to load them. You can't have them loaded. Well, how are you going to stop someone from making a lead ball and buying some gunpowder? We can make gunpowder. That's not difficult, is it? You've got to be realistic about it. And anyway, when it comes to crime, people still kill people in the UK. Knife crime in the UK is massive because you haven't got the access to firearms. You don't, but you've got access to knives, and people do run around killing people with knives and hatchets, and they've even banned curved swords in the UK. You used to be able to get samurai swords, bit of a curve on them, and Chinese ones, and put them on the wall. No, can't have them anymore because evil criminals have been chopping people up. But you're allowed to have them if they're a genuine antique. There's a guy on here I watch, I can't remember his channel, but he's a dealer, an antique dealer, and he's allowed to have antique swords, but you can't have reproduction swords. And you think, well, you can kill someone with an antique sword just as easy. And then they brought out this stupid rule about combat knives. Rambo with his knife, and it's got his compass in the handle. Combat knives. They're all banned. Can't carry a combat knife, but you can carry a kitchen knife. So if you got stabbed, you'd think, oh no, I've been stabbed. You look down and you think, oh, it's only a kitchen knife. Thank fuck for that. I thought I was in trouble then. And yet we're paying these people 150 grand a year to sit in their office thing, making up rules of nonsense. Oh, they've got, of course, you've got to be realistic with firearms regulations, but what happened in the UK, you had thousands of serious gun club, sensible people who had to hand in their firearms because of a couple of loons that went round. I mean, you can't predict someone's not going to become a lunatic and they're not going to be responsible in the future, can you? That's the nub of it, really. You can't. And when you recruit a police officer and make them into a firearms officer, you can't predict that they're not going to go and murder someone in the future. You just can't. So you've got to legislate realistically and not over the top.